Well, thank you guys. It's really wonderful to have all of you here. I had the opportunity to just have a conversation with Patricia, and we talked about kind of our experiences. And I asked her, I said, what's one question if you were to ask the group, what was that question? And she said, how to help us as women get more comfortable with our toughness, right? How and showing up. So I thought that was a great question and one we'll probably touch on at some point. So before we do, anything else anybody'd like to offer? Because if not, I'm going to ask Maya to take us to the group of four, and we'll start our panel conversation and just start having a chat around some questions that we thought might be interesting to discuss. And of course, we'll give space for everyone to ask questions as well. So I thought I'd start first with Kim. Kim is joining us in Atlanta, right? That's your home base, I think
That's
is.
right.
That's right, Atlanta. So how can leaders, as we think about the theme of International Women's Day today, how can leaders improve kind of their design and management of inclusive spaces? Or what can leaders do today based on your own experience as a consultant and in the work that you did in organizations to create a greater sense of belonging, not just for women, but for everyone in the workspace?
I love this question for a variety of reasons because it used to be very one dimensional, right? Before we moved into any type of hybrid workspace or even the consideration of that being normal or, right, what we have experienced before the pandemic started. We've now had to think about it in a different way. So, where inclusion meant extending the invite to everyone, or belonging maybe wasn't even talked about, or maybe was used in a different way, we've now had to get more clear in doing two things. Number one, defining what belonging is, but uniquely for whatever the individual organization is. So it's not this nebulous thing. It's not like what do we determine belonging is. And so leaders have truly had to start having conversations that perhaps they were maybe having in tucked away spaces or less publicly, but they're now having to open themselves up and say, when we define belonging, what we mean is that everything has a place. There's an opportunity for you to contribute, and the application of whatever it is that you contribute, while it may not happen now, understand that it doesn't devalue or define you any less. In fact, there may be a better opportunity for whatever it is that you're contributing to be present. Let's determine what that is so that your value then is really utilized. And so I think that defining what those words are around belonging has then shifted the design of what that looks like, because how do you belong on Zoom, right? Or how do you demonstrate belonging on Teams, or pick your platform? And it looks like encouraging different behaviors and different choices. At the very simplest level, it's turning your camera on, or saying, if you don't want your camera on, that's okay, but we would love for you to engage in the chat, or we would love for you to connect with folks this way, or here are opportunities outside of this environment that we have right now where you can contribute, that are going to allow you to show up authentically and perhaps not challenge you, right? Shout out to the extroverts or the introverts out there and those who may be in unique spaces, right? So we've kind of had to get more creative than this one dimensional approach that we took, because for so long that was the workforce, and that's not where it is anymore. And it's very likely we may not ever see a full return to that. And even if we do, the design and the way that the thinking is taking place is still going to need to evolve. So I think leaders are starting to have more conversations, and they're having to get creative with the way they're creating pathways and vehicles for people to actually show up and be present.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Kim. And I think it was, kind of a follow-on question that I feel compelled to ask is, how do we consultatively help leaders start to have that conversation with themselves and with others? I mean, so what would you say to that? How do we, in a consultative capacity, help them start thinking that way?
So a lot of it in my own work has been, let's talk about what has already worked really well.
Mhm.
And is that enough to say where we're going, right? Or where the there is that we want to get? Can we take components of it, and does it align with where we want to go? If it
Yeah.
does, then let's take the best components of that. And if it doesn't, let's re engineer our thinking on how we want to get there so that we don't lose critical talents, that we don't lose, right, intellectual property along the way. Some of it's also, how are we willing to take smart risks? Where have we not been that we need to maybe step into? What are those ideas that have been bounced around? This might be the time to do it, but openly saying that we want your ideas. It's okay for us to fail, right? We're going to fail fast. Create that safety for people to
Mhm.
try. I think safety is also wildly undervalued in these conversations. And I would love to hear my fellow panelists comment about that. But I think the safety piece of this, and
Yes.
reiterating that there's not going to be, any retaliation if we make a mistake and if we mess up. We're going to learn from that, and then we're going to move forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Kim. So Cara, with that in mind, and knowing the experiences that you've had, the places that you've worked, um, what have you seen, and that has helped create more of those inclusive spaces?
Yeah, I feel like this is something I am learning exponentially as I go. The first thing that came to my head was a mistake that I made a couple years ago, that you know how when we do that, sometimes it leads to us really changing something. But I was designing an offsite for a group of senior leaders in an organization that I had worked with before, and I was gonna meet them in a live space together, and they had one new team member who I hadn't met, and it did not occur to me or cross my radar to ask about accessibility needs or anything unique that might be happening with the team. I just like assimilated the new person into my head without thinking about it. And I showed up at the offsite, and this new team member was blind. And I had designed all these activities that were not going to work. And it was a very eye-opening moment for me. And we actually talked about it live and made it into a conversation. And we were able to pivot, but it was such great learning for me about how do I prepare for events and what questions am I asking ahead of time to make sure that my design is going to be inclusive for everyone. And I had another, I just like to talk about mistakes that I've made when I'm on panels. So I had another one really recently, which was I'm working with this group in higher ed, a group of IT leaders, and they're very, I was noticing that when I ask a question, I don't get a lot of response from them. It takes a little while to get them going. And so just starting to say, let's take some time and do some writing. Here's the question. Let's do some writing, making space for people who actually need to think and are more introverted or need to process something. And it completely changed the dynamic of the workshop with these folks. And so now I'm just like, look at who you're working with and who is thriving in that environment and who do you actually maybe need to carve out some space for. And I find the work of, I learned about this at the clinic with Jeff Evans, but the work of Nancy Klein, she wrote a book called Time to Think, and she has a bunch of structured practices that you can do with groups to make sure that you're building equality in a conversation when you have the people who talk too much and the people who don't want to talk. And she has some really great structures for that I find really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Your mistakes kind of lead me to remembering my own mistakes. And this isn't going to be a panel where we all talk about our mistakes, but to the point, great learning happens from that. And I think one of the things that I've learned is the importance of just being super vigilant and very observant around what's happening around me and observing the folks who are, whether it's in the classroom or in the meeting. And am I starting to get a sense of someone who was fully engaged is now slipping away, right? They're starting to slip away and not looking at it as a reflection on personal, but what has changed? How has the dynamic of the room changed? And what might I need to do to pivot to re-engage this person in the conversation? And I think that's part of being an effective consultant is being very vigilant and observing the whole, right? And seeing the whole and then pivoting as we need to. So Charlotte, love to hear from you as well. And maybe you want to share mistakes, some of the things that you've learned from too, or something else, some things that you've picked up as you've been doing so much consulting and coaching with leaders around this space.
Yeah, I love this topic as well and enjoy what Kara and Kim shared. And I'm going to kind of jump off to what Kim kind of hinted at or touched on, which was that safety piece, that psychological safety. So interesting working with teams and leaders and the tendency to downplay the importance of that connection. You know, we all did connection before content, and it's so important with teams and doing that team building. It sounds like Kara's had some fun team building activities and really utilizing that to help people connect with each other. uh, I cannot stress how important that is enough, because you can do all the design pieces, but if people don't feel safe and if they aren't connecting, then it doesn't work. And I recently worked with a client and did, some of you may be familiar with Acid River, which is kind of like the floor is lava. And it was so interesting in terms of the team working together to get through this river. But what the conversation that followed afterwards we were able to talk about the things that weren't shared, the ideas that people were nervous about bringing up and not talking about. But because we had created the psychologically safe environment, we were able to bring that out, and it is really powerful and impressive to see. And I think what goes hand in hand with that is giving people space to tell their stories, because I think stories are so important. It humanizes everybody to each other. All day long, we make assumptions. All day long, we assume we know what somebody's story is. And unless we're, as a leader and as an organization, are creating space for people to share their stories, those assumptions will go on. And that, to me, I have found so powerful. And it just, it just is an important part of us all understanding what it's like to be somebody else and being able to truly empathize and put ourselves in other people's shoes.
Yeah, I love that. The idea of, not the idea, just, but even the practice, right? Of allowing people to tell their stories and how quickly we can just move past that or move through that in the pursuit of getting down to business. Well, we have 30 minutes for this meeting. Let's go. And we've got stuff to do. And so creating space for the connection. And we do it intentionally through the work that we do in Flawless Consulting. But even in all of our interactions and all of our conversations, creating that space and creating the opportunity for that is important. So Cara and Kim, just kind of give you a chance to cycle back. Anything else you want to add on this before I move in and slide into a different question? Because a lot of good content came out. You're good. You're good. Awesome. All right. So, I shared at the beginning a lot of your some introductions around your career, what you've been doing. I myself have been either an external consultant or an internal consultant for more years than I really want to say out loud, because it starts to demonstrate my age. But for quite a long time that, we've been in the position of trying to influence for change inside organizations where we have no direct authority or control. It's only recently that I really started to call myself, quote unquote, a consultant, and looking at myself as having a consulting career. But as you think about your own career and as you have navigated moving from full-time, traditional corporate kind of jobs into your own consulting space, your own space in consulting, I'd like for you to just reflect on your own career in consulting, what you've learned perhaps, and what do you see for the future of women in this space? Because if you open up if you open up LinkedIn or news articles, it's not, you don't have to go too far before you see an AI post that consulting is going to be replaced. Humans are going out the door. AI is taking over everything eventually. So what do you think the future of consulting is, not only for just the industry, but for yourself? So, Cara?
I had to look out the window for a second and think about
That
that.
was your pondering face?
That's
That
what
was me pondering?
that's what I do. Yes, I have to turn and look out the window. You know, I'm 9 months into this gig.
Yeah.
So it's quite new for me after nearly 20 years of being internal. And one of the lovely and terrifying things that's happening is that I'm very quickly coming to a place where I'm going to have to decide if I want to grow beyond myself or not. That feels like a big decision. The support and encouragement that I get from other women in this field has been so incredible. Like women mentors who are 10, 20, 30 years ahead of me doing this, who are just like opening their doors and saying, what do you need? Here's my library stuff. Here's how I charge things. You want me to read your proposals? You're not charging enough. Like the greatest support, which I would never have known was there if I hadn't attempted this, and just tells me, oh, that's what I need to turn and do for other people at some point. So that's been really lovely. And there's a weird kind of opportunity right now that I feel in my own business, especially in tech, as there have been, you know, the industry is like gutting people and gutting jobs, and then being like, oh, wait, there was actually some stuff that we needed there. And I'm finding opportunities to plug back into organizations that let go of people like me. So that's been a curious experience. And there's this opportunity for women around as we start to see and become more clear about what a different experience women have in the workplace. There's a unique perspective and skill set that can be helpful to women. And I have other women colleagues who are focusing their consulting practice on working with women. And I'm finding that really curious as well.
Oh, thank you. I love hearing that. So folks saying you have a huge decision if you start to expand, and there may be some people wanting to apply. You never know. We'll take some job applications at the end of the conversation.
It's so, yeah.
That's
it's great.
awesome. That's great. Thank you. Charlotte, how about you? What are you seeing, in your own consulting career as well as the future of consulting for women? What are you noticing?
Yeah. So I spent 25 years in these large companies, and every role I had was very much a consultant type role. And so of course, when you're in a large company, you have the security of that regular paycheck. And you also have the opportunity to build those relationships over time. And then in 2015, switching and going out was a huge step for me because I have one son. He was, he was, I guess, he was 5 at the time. And my husband is a writer performer, so his income is not, regular, stable. And I was the breadwinner. And to make that jump to be a consultant full time was huge. But I felt absolutely like I need to do this. And it was scary. And like Cara, I had some wonderful networks of people that were there, that were supportive, other people that were new to either consulting or coaching. We would meet regularly for lunch and that sort of things. But I ended up going back to get my master's during this time while I'm launching a business, because I felt like I needed to, you know, uh, prove myself in a way, in the sense that I needed to have those certifications. And I already had a ton of certifications, but I felt like I needed to say, hey, I have, a master's in organizational development now, which again proves that I am worthy of doing this. And I think that was bred from my own insecurity, because ultimately I had such a strong referral system through LinkedIn, and making sure that I was connecting with people from LinkedIn, that my business the business of coming in and getting new clients took care of itself with so many referrals. And I think that network is extremely important. And I think that idea of owning what we're bringing to the table is so important. right? Because, I jumped with insecurities, but I still did it. I went forward and said, I'm going to do this. And it's those insecurities and those things that pop up in our head that say, are you sure you're really going to do this? That can also doom us. And I will tell you, over the last 9 years, there were many times when I thought, well, maybe I should just go back into a big company. Maybe I should just, ditch this. But every time I did that, my internal North Star kept going, nope, you're on the right track. You're on the right track. And now I do it without looking back. And somebody gave me some really great advice. They said, starting a consulting business or starting any business is like getting a plane off the ground. It takes a lot of fuel and energy and power to get that plane off the ground, but once you're up in the air, you're cruising. And it's so much better. And it's not the grind and the terrifying moments that you have when you start something out. And so I think women have so much to offer in this field. And I think the field is bright for women, and there's so much work out there. And I think it's all about leaning in, overcoming those fears, and jumping off the cliff and saying, I'm going to do this. Um, so I think that's really what's coming to me about all this.
Yeah, I love everything that you said. And I think the thing that resonated with me was you said I had to prove that I am worthy, right? So that
Yeah.
that own fear that we have that holds us back, and allowing ourselves to recognize it, right? Give it a little bit of space, but then move past it and say, it's not going to stop me. I am going to continue to propel myself forward and move forward. And for myself, I know when I went out and independently consulted and I started, asking for my day rate, I'm like, there's no way anyone's going to pay me this for a day's worth of work. I felt like I needed to apologize every time I would come forward with a proposal, only to find, to your point, Cara, people telling me who were mentors in the field, you're not charging enough, Beverly. I'm like, well, what? And so then feeling as though I had to provide them everything under the moon and the sun and the stars to validate my worth and my value. Whereas my worth and my value was just being there, right? And offering a perspective that they couldn't get inside their own organization. And whether we're an internal consultant or an external consultant, that's the value we bring, which is offering a perspective that they can't get otherwise. So Kim, I'm intrigued to hear from you because you're new from also leaving the large corporate environment and starting your own practice.
Yes. So, similar to Charlotte, came from, well-oiled machines, and, you learn a lot. You quickly begin to appreciate what I call the creature comforts of being on the inside, so to speak, right? So having intact teams that do some of the work that you now have to go figure out how to do, and then budget for that and anticipate the roadblocks and understand, where you now need to bring in help or partnership or whatever that is, right? To Cara's point, and it is a huge step, right? I am a team of one with one contractor. That is my business right now, and we make it work. But in that, I was very intentional and clear about what I was investing in, right? So I have an EA who also doubles as my virtual COO. And so I do what I'm great at. And I know I'm great at that. And it's taken me probably until this year to be able to say, I know I'm great at that. And I let her be magnificent in her ministry, which is everything that I'm not great at. And we work beautifully together. And it took me realizing, right, not being internal and being external on my own, to acknowledge that that's all I have to do. So to everybody who is thinking about it, I will encourage you to remember that you be great in your lane, whatever your lane is, and the rest will come through networks, through other women. And interestingly enough, at the start of my journey, it was the men who were saying to me, but I've seen you. I know that you are capable of this. Why, to your point, Beverly, why are you not charging that? You're an entire fractional chief human resources officer. Like, there is no other role higher than what you have achieved. Why would you not charge more than that? Well, because no. There's no well because. Why would you not charge more than that? And so having that level of conversation with myself, and being very clear about, at this stage in my business, this is what I'm capable of doing, and here's what I aspire to. So for me, the planning and the strategy became really important. to stay organized, but to also not get overwhelmed. I can't tell you how many times, similar to Charlotte, I was like, I'm going back. But every time I got close to thinking that, a new client would come, a new opportunity would come my way, right? Flawless came my way, and I got a whole network of other people, and that started to, and so it just reinforces that this was the right decision. It does not come without sacrifice or trade off. And it also opens up so much more opportunity because my confidence in my ability as a leader, as a business owner, right, as a consultant has tripled. There was a level of comfort that I had on the inside, right? Yes, it's steady. I understand the employee life cycle. The rhythms are all there. I know that this time of year is the comp strategy. I know this time of year is this. And now I design all of that and I inform other people about what that looks like. And they look to me for that. And so I had to shift my entire perspective on my own value, to your point, Beverly. Like, I'm going in, and it's not just the perspective that I'm offering me, it's my perspective of myself. And so that was the greatest learning, because I stopped being defined by the job description that these companies had. And I started defining everything that I am doing now, and will define it. I get to say yes to that. I get to say no to some things. I get to say, let me think about that, and then determine if that aligns with my strength, my energy, my capability. And I think one of my greatest superpowers is saying, you know what, that's not in my wheelhouse, but I got an excellent network of people. Let me introduce you to someone who is as fabulous as I am, and is going to be, and is going to be what you need here. And I think that that's the thing that I've also tried to leverage the most as I've rounded out my second year. So I'm only 2 years into my business. But as I've rounded out my second year, is being able to say, I'm great, but let me get you someone who's just as great, who is a rock star at this thing, because I'm not, and that's okay. I don't need to be. And that has helped me stay grounded every day as I do this, and not go running to try to apply for something on the inside or what have you. So those are the lessons that I've learned, but also how I've grown over these last 2 years.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I especially loved, I am not just a job description that someone made up for me, right? So the capacity and the opportunity to create, who you are and who you want to be. And I think everything that you all said leans so well into the other question that I wanted to ask, which is, Peter Block always says, the goal is to balance a life that works with a life that counts. So as you think about kind of the way all of your careers have changed over the years, Charlotte, what does that quote mean to you as you hear that, as you think about your own career? So the goal is to balance a life that works with a life that counts.
Yeah, I love that quote. I was so excited to see that question, because I've had such a twisty journey to really find that. I mean, I grew up actually as an actress and majored in theater undergrad. And interestingly enough, it really led well, or supported well, into the organizational development field. But as you probably can tell, I'm a really expressive, passionate person. And so I believe in doing things that I love. And so when I discovered this field of organizational development and leadership development and coaching, I knew I had arrived. And I can always tell something's, really resonating with me if I feel like I do this and not even get paid for it. And that's where I landed with this. It also, his quote, actually, it's a really succinct way of kind of, if you've heard of the term ikigai, which is the Japanese, right? Which is the combination of, your passion for what you love, your vocation, what you're good at, and your mission, what the world needs, and getting paid for it. And I think that quote about balance the work, a life of work that works and that counts, that works is you're getting paid for it, and the world needs it, and that's also a part of counting, but also that it works with you as an individual. And feel like I've really found that with the work that I do, because I feel like I'm making an impact, whether I'm working with one person or a team or a whole organization. I feel like after doing the work, I've left the place better than when I found it. And there's that butterfly effect, right? There's that trickle down. It's not just working with one person, it's how that person then interacts with the next person and the next person. And I do a lot of work with C-level suite leaders. And again, if I'm helping to shift their consciousness, helping them to see things in a different way, helping them to be more efficient with the engagement with their organization, then that impacts so many people. So I feel like this is where we should all live, really doing the work that we love, and that is contributing, to our community, to our world, whatever is in line with you and your values.
Thank you, Charlotte. Kim, how are you balancing a life that works with a life that counts?
I love this. I love what you just said, Charlotte, about being in alignment with your values. That's one of my personal statements. I always tell people, right, you want to be in alignment with your values and not in opposition of them, because when you are in opposition of them, then you are not being authentic to who you are. And you should always be authentic to who you are. And for me, this is very personal because I'm a single parent and I have a 10-year-old, and I am primarily his everything, right? So I'm a short order cook, I am the bank, I am the Uber, right? All of the things, right? But I'm the fourth grade math whisperer, I'm the science experiment thinker, all of those things. And so that doesn't turn off at any point in time. And so for me, the life that works is being able to own my time, where I can say, here's when I am absolutely available. And between these hours, my mom hat is on, and I don't sacrifice that ever unless I have to. And if I do, it's a conversation with my son about, hey, mom's got to do something here. What are you going to do, or how are we going to navigate that? Because I need him to know that he has a place among what it is that I'm doing. And it's working because I recently spoke at his school on for their career day, and he was so excited to have me there and to tell people that I was the top HR business partner. That's what he tells people that I am, because he kind of gets it, but he kind of doesn't. But more along the lines of, I had the time to do that, whereas before that may have been a vacation day, a sick day, a leave early, a skip a meeting. And that day represented, I can do it all, right? People say we want to have it all. That was an example of me having it all. I can structure my work, I can block my calendar, I can be present for my son, I can be involved in his life, and nothing has to suffer. And for me, that is a life, balancing the life of work also with the things that count the most, especially because you cannot get this time back. And I also value that because then I get to manage my calendar, my schedule, and prioritize myself more, which is also the thing that I've done a terrible job of. Let me be very clear about that. You want to know who puts themselves last all the time? This one. And this work has allowed me to shift that and incorporate intentionally what I'm going to do for myself every single day. So that's really been what I've prioritized, in terms of balancing that. What counts today, right? What counts today is that I eat breakfast, right? What counts today is that I'm available to read to my kid at night, right? What counts today is that I took a walk at lunchtime with my dog just to get some vitamin D because I needed it. So I have been very intentional about saying no and saying yes, because yeses are expensive. And we always have a pocket full of no's, but we give out our yeses freely. And so I think those are the ways that I've been balancing, my life, a life that counts more so alongside, right, the work that I do.
Oh, thank you. You take me back to right now, both of my kids are older, so they're 22 and 26. But I remember very well early on in my consulting career, traveling a lot. And I used to sing to my kids every night, no matter where in the world I was. I would call home and sing to them a song that I wrote for them called Angel Baby of Mine. I'm not singing it for you all now, but it is a pretty good little tune. Wherever I was in the world, if it was an airport, I would stop in the middle. I'd excuse myself from a restaurant with clients to step outside and stand in the New York City streets to sing the song to my kids at night. So my work was wonderful and the work that I had the opportunity to do was amazing. But the life that counts was those babies, right? And remembering them and creating space and always making sure that they knew they were still an important part of my experience. So thanks you, Kim, for helping me remember that. It was a sweet time. Cara, how are you doing at managing, and balance of life with work that counts?
Yeah, it's tricky when you're starting a business,
Yeah.
because I am like, so how much hustling is required for this, for me to pull this off? And I also was surprised. I always thought that I was a person who had really good work-life boundaries, but as soon as it was my own business, it like kind of went out the window, and I was working nights and weekends and doing stuff that I wasn't doing when I was internal. So that's been surprising to me, and figuring out, yeah, just believing in yourself and trusting that the work is going to continue to come. I think I am new at that part. I'm like, is this just beginner's luck? Like, is this a fluke right now that's happening? So that part is tricky, but what I thought about with your question was how I show up in my work and throughout my career. I've had a lot of, like many of us, work traumas, like terrible things happening, bullying, and getting let go because I was better than the guy that I worked for and he couldn't stand it. So he just fired me, and just like getting recruited across the country for a job only to find that the leaders I had come to work for were all ousted in a coup. And I was kind of left in this work situation where I was guilty by association with those people, and having these experiences where I have to say to myself, okay, how do I want to show up in this so that I am in integrity with myself? And so that when I leave this situation, I feel good about how I showed up, regardless of how I was treated here. And that, I mean, there's always the pony in there, the gift in the crappy situations that we get handed. But that's what I thought about, is how even when I'm working in the most dysfunctional situations, can bring something of myself that is steadying and has integrity and feels safe even in a not safe environment. And that part's important for me.
Thank you. It's a good transition into the conversation that I wanted to make sure we had time to have, because I think when I facilitate flawless, or not even flawless, but a lot of the work that I've done with women over the years specifically is, how do I, everything that, even hearing just very explicitly, everything you're saying, Beverly, is great. I agree with it, but I can't do it because I'm a woman in this work environment, or because I'm afraid of, if I show up that way, I'll be viewed as too pushy, too aggressive, too anything, just too much of something. And I know in Flawless, when we facilitate the program, we talk and we teach about the importance of being assertive, right? And being assertive to be able to ask for what it is that we want in the consulting agreement that we're seeking to reach with the client we're partnering with. And then also, we even talk about the importance of managing resistance. If someone's being resistant with you and you're not able to move forward, being able to effectively and assertively address that. And I think sometimes folks are challenged with that, right? And you don't necessarily have to be a female or a woman in order to feel challenged by that. Some of us are challenged by being assertive, and we have even almost a negative connotation around that. But I think it's a unique experience for women. So Kim, I wanted to hear from you around, um, how do you navigate that, or how have you navigated that as a woman in the workplace? And how are you navigating it now that you've moved outside into your own practice?
I love this question for a variety of reasons. And it's actually one that I get often as a coach, but also often as a thought partner to leaders. Because what I've learned is that they're all trying to figure out how to not be too much, to this, to that. And you have to navigate it thoughtfully. To me, it comes down to two very clear things. The first is self-awareness. So what is it that I'm bringing in to this situation? How am I adding value? What's my knowledge and my expertise that is going to be present here? And then I balance that self-awareness with being curious so that it invites opportunity for balance and exchange. I don't need to be the smartest person in the room. I'm totally okay with that. But sometimes, right, validation is a need and other people want it, and it shows up through that assertiveness. If I'm assertive in the way that I advocate for something. And so I use my voice, right? My voice is my greatest currency. I tell that to people all the time. My voice is my greatest currency. And so I absolutely name it and say, I'm going to speak up here in a way that may not necessarily be traditional, but this is an opportunity for us to do XYZ, right? It's sort of in the vein of the how might we statement. And I name what it is that I'm going to do. And when I do that, I find that it helps people feel like, oh, well, there's space for my voice too. And this is the shift that we're now taking. It's almost as if I remove the ability for them to be blindsided or for them to not appear as if they don't have space there. I deserve to be there just like they do. And so I'm getting comfortable with understanding what's the word economy that I can present that helps people feel like I don't need to one up you, but I don't need to do anything other than be available and be a thought partner. So for me, it's all about the power of words. And it's also about stating my intention. Hey, let me make sure you're clear on why I'm asking this question. You stated X at the top of the conversation. In order for us to do that, we've got to have some clear cut things that we need to address. So you're going to feel me pushing you a little bit. It's because we need to get here. And so when I do that, then that resistance, and I want to use that word intentionally because we talk about that in Flawless, right? That resistance starts to get lowered and people feel safe. And that goes right back to what Charlotte said earlier about psychological safety. So I do that. And I'm also mindful of that because I'm a woman of color. And so I come with even more presence and identified stigma. And so I don't want anyone to label me that because that's never my intent, though that might be the impact. And so for me, self-awareness carries high value alongside my curiosity and making sure that my word economy is clear, right? And naming what it is that I do. And those are all action behaviors that I had to intentionally say, how do I want people to experience me? That's my key question. When I can answer that question for myself, that helps set me up for success in conversations that I'm having with leaders or coaching clients or anybody that I want to influence at any level.
Yeah, I love that you asked that for yourself. I know when I often will say, if you're partnering with your clients, what do you want the experience to be for them, right? And what do I want their experience to be with me? And it's remarkable how rare it is for us to intentionally put thought behind that. We just kind of barrel into those conversations and into those experiences. But I love the idea of sitting with yourself, Kim, and thinking about it, right? And actually kind of naming it for yourself. So then you're in the economy of words, and words are so important. And how if we can't think through those words, if we can't think of it through ourselves, how are we going to articulate that with others? So Cara, as you think about this question, what has been your experience?
I'm just sitting here thinking, who's not going to hire Kim Blue?
Amen.
Like, that was so great. I was like, yeah, everything she was saying.
Exactly.
So I've been thinking about that, saying, what's the difference between being assertive and aggressive? Your gender.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody's heard that before. There's like a cartoon with it.
Is there? Okay.
Yeah. But I think that there was an interesting article in the New York Times this summer by Adam Grant, who's not always my favorite, but sometimes he writes some good stuff. And it was about the language that women have to use to kind of get shit done in the workplace and to be assertive without pissing people off. And he talks about this need for interpersonal sensitivity, how men and women are perceived differently in terms of being assertive. And so there's all this kind of newer research coming out about women using language strategically to be assertive. And I think that what Kim just said was a really great example of that. Hers is more leaning towards being overt with our intentions, which can just clear all kinds of stuff up. But he also just talks about the ways in which we can say things and be assertive and hedge a little bit or use a little bit of nuance in our language to just make it safer for everybody, which is ridiculous and sometimes necessary. You know, I use humor a lot, like that's kind of my route, and whether it works or not, but self-deprecation, you know, but then I will come in with the frying pan, and like, so I have I use both of those things, and I think women find themselves in a double bind often around this, and it's tricky territory to navigate. But I found that article actually really helpful and useful. I'd say things like, I have a hunch, you know, and then I'll just put my explicit opinion out there. But just saying it's a hunch, it like leaves enough breathing room in it that it's less I don't know, it's less, what's the word I'm trying to come up with? It's less
less explicit perhaps, or it leaves room for negotiation.
yeah.
When I have a hunch, right? It leaves
Yeah.
space for conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. Thank you.
Mhm.
So Charlotte, how about you? Less
Yeah,
absolute, JP said.
yeah, right. Kim, I love what you said, and Car, you too. What I also hearing in what you said, Kim, is the idea around managing expectations and kind of pulling out expectations, because we all come into these conversations in these agreements and work together with expectations. And if we put it out more explicitly and draw it out from others, then we deal with it. It's not the unspoken thing that doesn't get, solved or people getting upset. But I would say also that what I loved about teaching Flawless right off the bat was the way they define assertiveness. And it's that idea that it's respecting your right and my right. And I am fascinated when I teach these programs and watch people go through that assertive, aggressive, exercise. And women, especially, where they think, oh, I was being aggressive. And I've watched women like interact in this role play and they think, oh, I'm being aggressive. And I look at that and go, that's not aggressive, because you were caring for that person as well as caring for what you needed. That's assertive. And so even understanding that, and sometimes when I'm feeling particularly fired up to go at some kind of situation, I think about, is it just about what I want? Is it just about my needs? Or is it also about that other person's needs? And I think, around what Kim's saying, being really deliberate about the language that I'm using and making sure that I am respecting and seeing what they need here. But then I'm also really making sure that I'm respecting what I need and finding a way for us all to come to the table and to talk and to communicate and to work things out. I think that's so important. And so often I see people interchanging aggressive and assertive. We really have to understand what assertive is and follow that.
Yeah. And it is always interesting because oftentimes I'll ask the question, we'll do one-on-one coaching after a Flawless workshop, independent, one-on-one with the participants. And I'll say, people will say, I just didn't feel right, Beverly. I was asking for stuff and my client, and I felt like I was being too pushy, too aggressive. And I said, well, what is it that you were asking for? Well, I was asking if they would respond to my message. Like, well, that's just part of being in relationship with another person. Did you do it in all caps and did you yell at them? Well, no, I just wanted them to respond. I'm like, okay, well, but there's a reason for that. To your point, Charlotte, there's a reason why I need you to respond. It's so that I can help you with the project that we're working on. So I think in many ways it's getting comfortable with recognizing that we have the right to ask, but it's not absolute. To the point earlier, it is in relationship with someone else. How are we going to show up with each other? It's not just the what of our work, which we're all very comfortable talking about. It's the how of the work. It's how do we want to be with each other? And how we want to be with each other is, as we say, collaborative, right? Where I recognize what you need and want from our experience, but also here's what I need and want so that we can partner together on something that's meaningful and something that creates change, something that's useful, which is the final question that I want to ask. In
Beverly, can I
Florida,
can I
oh
add
yes,
something before
yes,
you do
please
that?
do.
Because it's just making me think about how we make these like our own personal failings at the trickiness of being able to do this when it's really we exist in a system that has taught us this. And when you think about, there was such another great article in the Harvard Business Review that was, I think the title was "Stop Calling It Imposter Syndrome," and it's like, do you know what I'm talking about, Maya? It's like it's not my own interpersonal failing that I feel like this. It's because I am existing in a system that is designed for me to have this experience. So there's something that's really helpful to me in remembering that and being like, oh, I have been taught to think like this, and I have been taught to see like this. Thank you for
Yeah.
letting me interrupt with
Oh
that.
no, I'm glad that you did. And I think it leads me to just one other point that I'll make on the topic. There's nothing more um, compelling or nothing more meaningful than to have a young woman as a daughter who is entering the workforce. My daughter's 22, she's graduating from college, and to see her navigating at the young age of 22, the conversations that we're having, and you would think, I'm like, really, we're still here. But just even being able to say no to a gentleman who may want to ask her out, and the capacity to do that. Well, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Just even now, still, finding ways in order to do that. We still have a lot of work to do, in that space. So, my final question, and then I want to create space for us to have a couple of time for other people to ask any questions. So we'll do this real quick. Oftentimes in the class, we say, stop being helpful and start being useful. And whenever we say that as part of being a consultant, we need to stop being helpful and start being useful. What does that mean, as a woman in the workplace? How have you started to make that shift with your clients, Cara? What does it mean to you first? And
Yeah,
then how do you show up differently, perhaps?
yeah. I think about, if you've heard about the like 3 ways to listen, that we sometimes we listen to fix. We're just listening to somebody. So, oh, there's my emoji. We listen to fix, or we listen to win. Like, I'm just listening for where you're wrong so that I can point it out. Or there's listen to learn. And when we're not conscious of really of how we're listening, we are doing those first two, and then we can come in thinking that we know better what somebody else needs, which is rarely the case. So there's just something around uh not assuming that we know best for someone because they gave us 5 minutes of context about what they're experiencing, and then we know how to solve it for them. So it's like, find out from somebody, what do they want? What are they looking for? Are they looking for an ear? Are they looking for responses? Are they looking for coaching? Like, do that on the front end of a conversation so that you're not just showing up as a fixer or a problem solver or a rescuer for someone, which isn't
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. I love that. Thanks. Charlotte.
Yeah, something similar in the sense. I really do think it's about how you show up. And my mom was from the South, and so there was a lot of that very traditional women kind of upbringing. And so often, that means making sure people feel okay, being a pleaser, smoothing out conflict, all of those things. And though that may be appreciated, it's not always useful. And when I think of really showing up in a useful light, there's some courage that sometimes has to happen, at least for me, in terms of being willing to ask the tough questions, being willing to call people out, even if it's hey, can I just tell you what I'm noticing right now in this moment, right? It's just so important that we're willing to do that and willing to stand up and and call it like it is and see things. And I think Kim did such a beautiful job in describing how she is using her communication and her words to do that. And I think as women, whether it's genetic or we're nurtured to take care of people, and I'm a mom too, so I definitely put on my mom hat, but I have to pull back from that when I'm in situations where, you know what, it's going to be a lot more useful if I have the courage, kind of call things out, to talk about things and ask the tough questions, to get people thinking in a different way, to get people to see things, to pull off blinders, right? Um, and be able to move forward and make, real change.
Yeah. Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of kind of having the courage, right? So within stop being helpful and moving to being useful, there is courageousness that's required. So Kim, as you think about that, what does it mean to you and how have you made that shift with your clients and your work?
Yes, this has been a place I've really had to make a shift because when I was on the inside, there's so much that can, get lost in the sauce, or this person has to touch it, or that person, or we've got to wait for this approval. I'm it, right? I approve it, I check it, I build it, I create it, I design it. So it all lives with me. So it's about accountability and holding others accountable and being really intentional about saying, okay, in order for us to get to this place, here are the things that are going to need to happen. Let me be clear about what I'm going to own. And then I want to hear from you what you feel is most appropriate or what aligns with your scope or your ability or whatever that might be. And so I go back to that, naming it. And then I clearly state, if these things aren't done, then we won't get to where it is you say you want to be, or what that might look like. And then I get really curious around saying, now knowing we've laid this out, what, if anything, do you feel like is going to like prohibit us from seeing success or getting to this outcome? And that's that's very assertive right up front, because I'm naming the accountability, and then I'm asking you to tell me what you think is going to get in the way. And so now you out loud have got to say, well, it's really just me. Okay. So when we come back to have what might be, right, that difficult conversation that Charlotte just referenced, because sometimes you do have to have them, right? Now we're going back to, so remember we talked about these things, and here's how we identified that, what shifted or changed that kept you from doing that. And I can then sit in my seat thoughtfully without sacrificing my ability to still be a partner, to still encourage, right? I get to play my role and support whatever that is. And before, that could very easily get lost. And now that I own every part of the process, I can invite them in safely and let them know that even if we miss a step, even if that step is on you, we're still going to get there. It just means that we have to, right? We have to go back and recontract on the things that were and how we're going to move forward, right? And I think a lot of that has come from and even just recently, like the work that I've learned and the things that I've taken away from like being a flawless consultant, right? How you hold people accountable thoughtfully, because resistance shows up and all these other things to show up. And like I said, I've got one job. I own it all end to end and insert, the pieces where they need to. Were those balloons for me, Cara? Thank you.
Yep, I just wanted to support you far with some balloons.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But that's it. That shift has really been, I own it. I own it. And let me state what I own, and then let's get clear about what you own, and then let's be accountable to that ownership. Whereas before, it's kind of easy to hide a little bit, right? Behind that, behind an email, behind it, oh, it got lost, behind a process change. None of that. Here's what I own, here's what you own. And that clarity has been very empowering for me.
Yeah, it reminds me, in many ways, when we're operating inside an organization as an internal consultant, we talk about it in Flawless. Folks oftentimes want us to be either an expert or a pair of hands, right? Which is, I have a problem. I would like for you to fix it for me and essentially be my pseudo manager, a staff person. Here's the problem. Please fix it and come back to me when everything's good. Or the opposite, which is, I have a problem, I know how to fix it, and I just want you to implement some of these tasks. So we become kind of in that order taker space. But consultatively, we're trying to move towards collaboration where it's a shared conversation. It's a shared partnership. We want to work together to identify what's really going on. And that's where we can be. That's where the shift goes from being helpful. And whether we're, for many of us, because of our education, we're kind of in a helpful education, right? By our nature, we want to be helpful. But even in our own mindset, moving away to being useful and bringing people to a space where we're partnering together to get to the solution together. And that requires courage. I remember your story just reminded me of a conversation I had when I worked internally. I worked for 16 years for NASA's space shuttle program. And I was trying to work with an engineer to get something done. And he was so resistant. I mean, we bumped our heads for a while. And I finally one day got the courage to look at him and say, is it that you can't do it or that you just don't want to do it? And he looked at me, kind of sat back. He goes, well, I don't want to do it. I said, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Let's talk about why you don't want to do it. So it is having the courage. And that's what we as consultants, that's the gift that we bring to those experiences. So thank you all. It's been a beautiful conversation. I've enjoyed it. I hope everybody who's been listening in has enjoyed it as well. We have about 9 minutes left. So Maya, do we have anybody who has any questions? It's a good time for us to just open up for any questions anybody wants to ask, or and we'll go from there. So Naz, I see you have your hand raised.